The Boston Celtics move on.
The Boston Celtics have swept the Sixers. Those were the final words of a season that went from finals hopeful to first round bust. Everything about the 2019-2020 season for the Sixers was awful. Al Horford didn't fit in whatsoever with the team, was holding Embiid back, and was signed to $109 million over the next 4 seasons. Tobias Harris didn't make the jump that was desired. Now he was sitting at an awful contract, 5 years, $180 million. Joel Embiid, the Sixers' star center, had arguably regressed. Ben Simmons still showed no sign of an improved jump shot, as Jimmy Butler, a guy who the Sixers chose to not bring back in free agency, was on his way to the finals with his new team. Disaster in every way of the word. But how did we get here? How will this be fixed? Will it be fixed? Well, it's only right that we start from the beginning. The beginning of the process. 2011, 2012.
Embiid fakes, drives, and a massive jam.
Harris, 2-point game. Here comes Butler driving, layup is good. He ties the game.
So it's just a breath of fresh air that they have some NBA talent on the floor like Embiid.
In a lockout-shortened season, the Sixers, led by Andre Iguodala and Drew Holiday, were the 8th seed in a first-round matchup against the Derrick Rose-led Bulls. Many thought the Bulls would easily take this series in 4 or 5, but then tragedy struck. Derrick Rose, the youngest MVP in NBA history, went down with an ACL injury. Just like that, everything changed. The Sixers went on to win the series in an incredible Game 6, with Iguodala draining 2 free throws as the 8-seeded Sixers beat the Bulls in heartbreaking fashion. Then, on to the next series, against the Boston Celtics. Many thought this would be when the Sixers folded. Injuries won't bail them out now, people said. But the Sixers fought harder than many expected, forcing the series to 7, but losing. There was a lot to be hopeful about with this small playoff run, but still so many questions and concerns. Who would be their star player to lead them? Every team needs one. Andre Iguodala won't cut it. Time to make a trade for who many consider to be the second best center in the league, Andrew Bynum. He'll certainly put us over the top. And from this very trade, this very moment, sparked a domino effect that would end up leading to one of the worst seasons in NBA history. But not yet. The Sixers had an exciting new squad. Even if it meant giving up Andre Iguodala, they received a star player in Bynum. He will certainly lead us to the finals. The championship runs through Philly. What? You're telling me he got injured via bowling? Andrew Bynum never even played a game for the Sixers again, and wasn't ever the same when he did play. He retired only a few years later. This led to the 2012-2013 season being a wash from the very beginning. You gave up all of these assets only for Bynum to never play. It was over from that injury. They finished a few games out of the playoffs. Bynum left them in free agency, and now panic was on the horizon. The Sixers hire general manager Sam Hinkie to save their woes. Certainly he will lead the franchise back to prominence. Hinkie's method of trading every asset worth a dime for draft picks was interesting. He started by trading young and upcoming point guard Drew Holiday to the Pelicans for the pick that became Nerlens Noel. Drew was an all-star at the time, and Nerlens Noel just tore his ACL and would miss the next season. This surprised many, but Sam had a plan. Syracuse point guard Michael Carter-Williams was also drafted, so you had MCW and Noel, 2 nice building blocks on the surface. He then hired Australian head coach Brett Brown, who proved very well at developing different talent over the years, and the team was set. The 2013-2014 Sixers opened up at home against the Miami Heat, the defending champions, and it was absolutely amazing. The Sixers beat them. A team that was expected to be in the lottery just beat the Heat, with MCW looking absolutely amazing, having what many consider to be the greatest debut in NBA history, recording 22 points, 12 assists, 7 rebounds, and 9 steals. It didn't stop there though. They ended up starting 3-0 on the year, which doesn't seem like much, but for a team many thought would be the worst in the league, it was a sign of hope. Then disaster struck. They started dropping games, and it quickly became apparent those 3 games were a mirage. At one point, the Sixers had the second longest losing streak ever at 26 games in a row of straight L's, and finished with a 19-63 record. There was still hope. Michael Carter-Williams had won Rookie of the Year, and while he had his shooting flaws, there was potential. Nerlens Noel had yet to play a game either and would make his debut next season, so the 2014 draft was an important one for the Sixers as they landed the 3rd overall pick. All season long, fans wanted them to draft high-flying forward Andrew Wiggins, who many thought had superstar potential. So when they dropped to the 3rd pick overall and Wiggins was unavailable, it was panic time in Philly. Panic time for everyone except one man, Sam Hinkie, who decided to take a chance on Kansas big man Joel Embiid. A guy who was expected to be the number 1 pick, but then got injured a few days before the draft with a foot injury that would cause him to miss the next season. But that didn't stop Hinkie. He saw Embiid's footwork, his quickness, his defensive ability, and drafted him 3rd overall.
Joel Embiid.
The Sixers also selected point guard Elfrid Payton, then traded him for Dario Saric and a future protected 1st-round pick, which proved to be a great move for Philly, not to mention a 2nd-round pick selection of Jeremy Grant that was even better. The 2014-2015 season began with some excitement, MCW developing his skills, Nerlens Noel seeing some action, but the story wasn't necessarily who was playing, but who wasn't. Dario Saric was overseas with some questions about whether or not he'd ever come over. Joel Embiid was set to miss the entire season, so more losing was expected, and more losing came. They finished with an 18-64 record. The most notable moment of that season was the Michael Carter-Williams trade. A guy who just won Rookie of the Year was shipped out for a Lakers 1st-round pick. This shocked fans as people thought he was an up-and-coming guard, but to the Sixers, his shot wasn't developing as they'd like, and they thought his potential was gone. This turned out to be an incredible trade for the Sixers, as that Lakers pick would end up being the 10th slot in the 2018 draft, and Carter-Williams faded into a bench player. Besides that, the season was very forgettable, and the Sixers headed into the 2015 draft trying to draft a player worth all of the losing, getting the 3rd pick again with many options available. They chose the wrong option in Jahlil Okafor, another center, which would mean in the past 3 drafts, their highest picks have been 3 straight centers. Sam Hinkie thought that taking the best player was always the best move, stockpiling those assets, and that's what he did. Jahlil Okafor was a bust, nothing short of that, and Nerlens Noel, while showing flashes his rookie year, wasn't anything special either. This led to the media questioning Sam Hinkie and the Sixers organization. All of those picks, yet nobody who's good enough to be a star player, which is the whole reason the Sixers started this rebuilding process anyways. Another important trade was made though, the infamous Sixers-Kings trade, where Philly took on some big contracts, received Nick Stauskas, and a first-round pick swap with Sacramento for essentially nothing. This pick will be very important down the line. For now, we enter the 2015-2016 season and Sam Hinkie's final year with the Sixers, and this would prove to be the most painful year of the process for Philly, as they only won 10 games. 10! You heard that right. Only the Bobcats and Sixers from 40 years ago have worse records. There was a silver lining for all of that losing though. Players like Robert Covington, TJ McConnell, and Jeremy Grant all emerged as solid bench pieces / starters when it looked like they were nobodies. Another important component to note is that many expected Embiid to play this season, but in the previous summer, it was found out that he was not recovering to the liking of the Sixers and had another surgery, meaning he's missed the first 2 seasons of his career. This was by far the most painful year to be a Sixers fan, starting to wonder if Embiid was ever gonna play, as Noel and Okafor showed nothing of significance, and Dario Saric still has yet to come over. The point that probably hurt the most was the Emmanuel Mudiay half-court game winner to beat the Sixers. Yep, that one. This season sucked. As the year wraps up in April 2016, Sam Hinkie steps down as general manager, Brian Colangelo replacing him. In reality, he was all but forced out by Adam Silver, as the league hated the Sixers' method of tanking and getting draft picks. At this very moment, Hinkie's legacy with Philly wasn't the best. He had some promising talent and interesting draft picks in the future, but no stars yet. It was quickly discovered that his legacy is one that needs more writing, as he receives praise because the Sixers got the #1 pick. The consensus guy was Ben Simmons, a 6'11" point guard with passing and defense like no other, who was selected by the 76ers.
Ben Simmons.
He would be the star that would take Philly to new heights. He looked awesome in Summer League. Oh my god, he got injured and he's missing the entire season. Even more pain sulks over Philly fans, but still, there is hope. Joel Embiid, who was drafted in 2014, would finally be able to play in the 2016-2017 season. The lottery pick, Dario Saric, would also suit up. The future was bright in Philly. Embiid looked phenomenal from the very start, and he was everything you'd hope he would be. Footwork like Hakeem, a capable three-point shooter. There were times when he looked unstoppable, and the Sixers looked like a playoff team. He only played 33 games out of 82, so those health issues rose up. But still, you couldn't deny the talent that was there. This was finally what the Sixers have been searching for after all of those years, a star player. Robert Covington was also emerging as a key 3-and-D player, and Nerlens Noel, the once high lottery pick with potential, was given the boot for a measly return. There was one positive about Ben Simmons being out, and that was that the Sixers would lose more, and with more losing meant a higher chance at a better draft pick in a stacked 2017 class. The Sixers finished with a 28-54 record, which was an 18-win improvement over the prior year. Things were looking up for Philly. Now they entered the 2017 NBA draft with high hopes, so many players available that could help this team even more. They ended up getting the 5th pick, which was great at the moment, but we soon realized that the Kings trade from a few years ago, yep, that one, would give them a swap, which means in actuality, Philly got the 3rd pick in a loaded class. This is just another page of Hinkie's legacy being written. An absolute fleece of a trade with the Kings is now reaping the benefits. Or so we thought. Because while the Sixers were in a great position with the 3rd pick, they wanted more. They were eyeing Washington point guard Markelle Fultz, who at the time wasn't going to be available at the 3rd slot because he was the consensus top player. Consensus to everyone except Danny Ainge and the Celtics, who traded down with the Sixers, giving Philly the #1 pick for a future first and the 3rd spot. At the time, this seemed like a huge win for the Sixers. Now you have an opportunity to complete the process and put together a core of Markelle Fultz, Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid. One that seemed formidable on paper. Fultz could shoot the lights out and create shots. Ben could play the defense and playmake. And Embiid could do what Embiid does. The Sixers, of course, chose Markelle, and he was everything they wanted him to be in Summer League.
Little coming out party here at SLC, coming right back at you.
High draft picks, but who has stood out? He did mention Briscoe. He did mention the pace they're playing.
Oh my! Allen went to the rack and Fultz was there to meet him.
Then the season started and his form died. He had some shoulder issues and was out for the foreseeable future.
Mechanics is what I'm interested in. That's a bad looking free throw right there.
Just like that, the focus went from Ben, Markelle, and Joel to Ben and Joel. And Ben Simmons did not disappoint. Immediately, he showed his incredible passing ability, defense, playmaking. He was out of this world good and the runaway rookie of the year, as much as Donovan Mitchell fans want to deny it. Embiid made his first All-Star appearance too, cementing himself as one of the best bigs in the league, as guys like Robert Covington and Dario Saric found their roles. Jahlil Okafor, however, never found his role and was traded for pennies on the dollar, showing that Hinkie did in fact miss with Noel and Okafor. Nobody cared about that though, as Ben and Joel led the Sixers to their best season in a decade and a half, making it to the playoffs for the first time since 2012, with the future looking even better as Markelle Fultz did return and have the, at the time, youngest triple-double in NBA history. But his shot was still not there. Notable games like the Sixers versus Lakers one, where Embiid dropped 45, or Cavs Sixers, where Ben schooled LeBron. They were all so memorable and made this season a blast. The Sixers then faced the Heat and took care of them in 5 games, many even expecting Philly to head to the finals like Stephen A. Smith. But that was put to a screeching halt as the Celtics dominated them in 5, led by rookie Jason Tatum, the guy selected with the pick Philly traded. Not to mention how overlooked the Celtics were because they were missing Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward. A tough end to a great season. The Sixers still had the 10th pick from the Lakers in that MCW trade, as well as tons of cap space for star free agents. This was it. This could be the formation of a championship team. That didn't happen. The Sixers found no luck in signing superstar free agents like LeBron or Paul George, and in the draft, they selected 3-and-D wing Mikal Bridges, who was from Philadelphia, but then traded him for Zaire Smith and a Miami Heat first-round pick, which ended up being a poor choice depending on who you ask, as Zaire Smith just never worked out in the NBA, but that Heat pick would be used in a major trade soon to come. Their luck wasn't in the lottery though, as outside of it, they chose sharpshooter Landry Shamet with the 26th spot and shot creator Shake Milton with the 54th pick, both who would be excellent selections. They then hired former NBA player Elton Brand as their new general manager, as before the draft, Brian Colangelo had some burner Twitter accounts where he talked smack about Sixers players. Yeah, that happened. With an offseason that many considered a disappointment, Philly entered the 18-19 season with questions. Had Ben Simmons developed a jumper? Will Markelle Fultz return to his college self after a bad rookie year? Will Brett Brown prove himself to be a good head coach after a series against the Celtics where many think he got beat by Boston head coach Brad Stevens? Would newly hired general manager Elton Brand perform well with a lot at stake? It all started with Boston, TD Garden for a rematch, and it went horribly.
1 of 12 shooting, Tatum on the fly. Brown! Jason Tatum, here he comes.
The Sixers got blasted by Boston. Fultz looked lost out there, and Embiid was overmatched as Jason Tatum, a guy Philly could have had, dropped bucket after bucket. The season started out slow for the Sixers. They weren't meeting the desired expectations, so a trade started going in the works. Minnesota guard Jimmy Butler emerged as a top candidate, a multiple-time All-Star, and someone who could help lead a team to the finals. Only 2 issues. He destroyed Minnesota's locker room because others couldn't take his tough mentality, and he's a free agent following this season. Who cares? The Sixers trade for him anyways, including Robert Covington and Dario Saric in the deal, 2 very popular members of the Process era. It was a tough price, but overall worth it as you get that star player needed in Jimmy. The season goes onwards. Markelle Fultz ends up shooting this funky free throw and plays his last game with the Sixers on November 19th, 2018, as he searches for some shoulder specialist to help him figure out this issue. With Fultz entirely out of the picture, it's the Simmons, Embiid, and Butler show, as they show tons of potential, but in the eyes of rookie GM Elton Brand, they need a bit more.
It is Butler for the win. Yes!
On February 6, 2019, the Sixers traded 2 first-round picks and rookie sharpshooter who had been playing well in Landry Shamet for Clippers forward Tobias Harris, Boban Marjanovic, and Mike Scott. They may have mortgaged their entire future, but holy hell does their starting lineup look nice. The next day, Markelle Fultz was traded. The saga was over, with the lasting memories being ugly jump shots and missed games. Even in Orlando, Markelle has yet to regain his shooting. This year, in the first few games, he was averaging 20 points per game until he tore his ACL. The Sixers were going all in this year. This was their opportunity, and as they swiftly beat the Nets in 5 in the first round, they squared off against the Toronto Raptors, led by Kawhi Leonard. It was a hard-fought series, with some incredible games like Game 3, but they ultimately lost in Game 7, in one of the worst ways possible.
Here, if you're Philly.
It's off to Leonard, defended by Simmons. Is this the time?
On Lopez, tough shot, followed by Simmons. Lost the ball, picks it back up, jump shot, it's good! Butler takes and beat down the lane.
Game! Series! Toronto has won!
An off-balance, rim-juggling shot that sent them home with many questions. Do they keep Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris? Does Brett Brown stay for losing another playoff series? Those questions were answered, but not in the way you'd expect. The first decision was Jimmy Butler. Many thought he would stay because of the potential of the team, how they could still make the finals and needed more time to gel. Handing him a 5-year max deal when he was 30 came with a risk. He could lose his athleticism and skill, which would turn that contract into rubbish in a few years, is what many feared. We don't know for sure if the Sixers did offer that 5-year deal to him, but if I had to go out on a limb, I'd say no, considering they offered that same 5-year deal to Tobias Harris, who was at the time, and still is, much worse than Butler, but is younger, so maybe that could have something to do with it. Nonetheless, Butler went to Miami in a sign-and trade where Philly received Josh Richardson, a young defender with 0 shot creation or shooting. They then used that new cap space to sign veteran 33-year-old big man Al Horford, which turned out to be a disastrous decision as Al hampered the team with no shooting and constant clogging of the paint. not to mention him holding Embiid back. They then gave a 5-year, $180 million deal to Tobias Harris, which many consider to be an overpay, and which now has turned into a bad contract. Shooting would be a factor with this team, as they also let JJ Redick walk, which would hurt. This team had zero shooting, and as a result of that, a disappointment of a season followed.
Aaron Gordon! Oh my goodness!
The 2019 draft was met with Philly getting defensive beast Matisse Thybulle in a trade with the Celtics, which turned out to be a good one, but still, it was hard to be satisfied with how bad the roster ended up being built. Many expected the Sixers to be one of the best in the league entering the 2019-2020 season, but instead, it was anything but. They struggled after their 5-0 start and finished with the 6th seed with an ugly record of 43-30. Al Horford was awful for this team, and how could he be? This was the most awkward fit possible. Playing with Joel Embiid led to zero spacing. It just didn't work out. Embiid also had a bit of a decline, going from 27 points per game to 23, and just looking out of shape and unhappy on the court. Ben Simmons continued to develop his defensive game, but his shot was a 0. Tobias Harris wasn't living up to his big contract at all, becoming one of the most overpaid players in the league. He couldn't hit a momentum 3 to save his life. Josh Richardson didn't fit either. The Sixers tried to mold him into a shooter, which did not work at all, and their bench was depleted as fans called for Brett Brown and Elton Brand's head. They ended up getting swept in the first round by the Celtics. Horrible season and a waste of Embiid's entering prime. The worst part of this all were the players that were/could have been Sixers. Jimmy Butler led the Heat to the NBA Finals, playing incredible basketball. Jason Tatum went to the Eastern Conference Finals, dropping bucket after bucket. Hell, even Markelle Fultz led the 8-seeded Magic to an upset Game 1 victory over Giannis and the Bucks. It was nothing but pain in Sixers Town. How do they fix the team now? They immediately fired Brett Brown, which was good news for many, but still, the problems went deeper than just the coaching. The organization was at fault, but hiring former NBA champion head coach Doc Rivers helped. Even with his questionable playoff history, he was a step above Brett. It turns out Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey didn't like what was going on in the organization, so he stepped down, and immediately the Sixers went after him. Morey is one of the best GMs in basketball, so once the Sixers made a strong impression at him and he signed, things were immediately on the upswing. Elton Brand stayed, but Daryl and him had the most control, which was excellent news. He can bring the franchise back to greatness! Immediately, he started by trading Al Horford and a future first to the Thunder for Danny Green. Horford had a horrible season with the squad, and that contract would be hampering the team for years. It was a good move. Hell, Danny Green has turned into one of the most important players for Philly as well. Then he drafted Kentucky point guard Tyrese Maxey at the 21st spot, which has turned out to be a steal as Maxey has shown flashes of being a promising young guard. Trading Josh Richardson for Seth Curry was another great move, as the lost shooting has been restored in the city of brotherly love. Seth has given the Sixers much needed sniping. Daryl Morey has turned this Sixers team from one dead in the water to one with spacing. Head coach Doc Rivers has done a great job as well. Tobias Harris, once looked at as the worst contract in the league, has had a great bounce back season, averaging 20 points per game on 40% from 3, which is huge. And perhaps the biggest story of them all, Joel Embiid has taken the next step and become an MVP candidate. Not just candidate, but number 1 on every leaderboard. until he got injured. He's averaging 30 on 51-41 splits with 11 rebounds, an absolute monster! Ben Simmons, while not improving in shooting, has emerged as perhaps the best defender in the league. The Sixers are number 1 in the East, with one of the best records in the league at the time of recording this. The team has tons of chemistry, and Embiid was dominating until he got injured, and I'm sure when he gets back, he'll continue. A far cry from the horror of last season. Well, where do we go from here? They've had a great regular season, but will this keep up in the playoffs? Will the George Hill acquisition prove worthwhile, and will skipping on Lowry eventually haunt them? This team and franchise has had quite the revival, but this must continue and we can't stop here. Only time will tell, but one thing's for certain. You must always trust the process.